Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and here's a look at some of the stories we're covering for you today. Americans, Afghans, and a slew of others have rushed to Kabul's international airport to try to flee the country before the U.S.'s planned withdrawal date on August 31st. Billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars have been spent in Afghanistan. With the country falling apart, it has many asking, what do we have to show for it? We speak with Congressman Ralph Norman to get his take. The number of American workers filing for unemployment fell to a pandemic-era low last week, a sign of continued labor market recovery. Some economists expect to be at pre-pandemic numbers by the end of this year. U.S. Capitol Police have identified the man responsible for the bomb threat that forced buildings all around the Capitol to evacuate, including members of Congress. The Pentagon says the U.S. military is ramping up evacuations out of Afghanistan.
The U.S. military footprint in Kabul is now more than 5,200 total troops on the ground. Kabul airport remains secure and open for flight operations.
Army Major General Hank Taylor said on Thursday that 12 C-17 aircraft departed with 2,000 evacuees over the past 24 hours. According to Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby, that included nearly 300 Americans. Americans, Afghans, and a slew of others have rushed to the airport in Kabul to try and flee the country before the U.S.'s planned withdrawal date of August 31st.
We've already evacuated more than 18,000 people since July and approximately 13,000 since our military airlift began on August the 14th.
President Joe Biden has said he will continue military evacuations of Americans until all those who want to leave are evacuated. However, the challenge for many is taking the trek from their homes to the airport in Kabul, as the Taliban tightens their control and the U.S. has no way to safely escort them. The situation on the ground in Afghanistan has deteriorated rapidly, and thousands of U.S. citizens are still trying to make their way out. Here with us to discuss the ongoing crisis in Afghanistan is South Carolina Congressman Ralph Norman. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Steve.
Congressman, I want to ask you about the situation in Afghanistan right now. It's quite dire. We're seeing reports that Americans are having a hard time making their way to the airport in Kabul. People are being killed in and around the airport. These are American citizens, and you know, it's chaotic, they're afraid. From your perspective, do you think this withdrawal could have been handled differently to produce a cleaner exit from Afghanistan?
First of all, this administration is callous and non-caring toward the human carnage that you and I both see on TV. I mean, to see the people dropping out of the planes, to see the 640 Afghans on the cargo ship, to see them running underneath the planes. I heard this morning there were 250 Christians that are most likely going to be slaughtered. For this president to take 48 hours to address the American people, to take no questions, to go on vacation after that along with his press secretary, shows a disconnect. This country, the leadership, the non-leadership that he's providing is like a ship without a rudder and there's nobody at the helm. He might as well turn the teleprompter around. It's so difficult for him to even read that and just let the American decipher for themselves. But no, it's a human tragedy. It didn't have to happen. When do you set dates for a rogue regime that in lightning speed has taken over something that we've been there 20 years? And I hate to see it, and this country will pay a price. What does this administration think they're going to be doing now that they've taken over Afghanistan? They're going to be plotting attacks on our soil with our intelligence not there. And it's heartbreaking, to say the least.
Now, I just want to ask you about the latest extension of the CDC eviction moratorium. You're a congressman representing the people in your district. How are everyday Americans that might be calling your office, small landlords, being affected by these moratoriums?
It's a terrible effect. I had a call from a principal of a school who has a mortgage payment, who had built a rental house, has not been paid in 8 months. When is it government's role to dictate who gets paid and who doesn't? These are Americans who have invested, they have helped the economy, and to give a free pass is not right. That's You know, if there's ever a 10th Amendment, states' rights, individual rights, it's now. And for the Biden administration to extend this makes no sense. It's un-American, and it's going to continue to hurt an economy that's already been shut down for over a year and a half with COVID.
Now, I mean, I think a lot of times when people hear these, debates going on in the media about the moratorium, it's not necessarily these big corporate landlords that are being affected. You have a lot of mom and pop landlords, people who rely on their rental income to survive.
Well, they do. And I'm in the real estate business. We've built apartments. A lot of apartments are sold to REITs, but at the end of the day, it boils down to people owning properties and are just trying to have a return on their investment and provide a service. We forget that, whether it's apartments or whether it's single-family housing, they're providing a vital service for people to put a roof on their head. That's where you have dinner. That's where you have families that gather together. And when you stop the payment, and how do you define the effects of COVID? I mean, how do you monitor against those who really are using that as a excuse either to not pay rent or are not using the COVID dollars that have come their way to pay what rightfully they owe? I don't know of a landlord that I have met that wouldn't work with somebody, because it's been a serious pandemic like none other that we have faced. But for the government to come in and mandate this is not right then, it's not right now, and to extend it is ludicrous.
Now, I just want to switch gears for a moment here, Congressman. I want to ask you about President Biden's infrastructure bill. A lot of times with these bills, there are certain things that make their way in, Trojan horses, if you will. The American people aren't too clear on some of these things. There's something in there that's pushing to relax the zoning laws in the suburbs, and I think that on the surface it may seem innocent, but what do you think this could lead to, and why should people be concerned about this?
Well, first of all, the first $1.5 trillion was 2,700-page bill passed in the middle of the night. Is it really too much to ask, particularly the 19 senators, to not allow this, to not go along with something that most likely they haven't even read? On the name that this administration puts on not just the infrastructure bill, but on a lot of bills, it's anything but infrastructure. When you talk infrastructure, you mean roads, you mean bridges, you mean water, sewer. They're bailing out green cities bailing out blue cities that have been mismanaged. And this is really an extension of the Green New Deal. On both bills, I haven't seen $3.5 trillion, but the initial 1.4 was just 10% that went for what you could call infrastructure. The balance of it went to bail out, to put electric charging stations, to do a lot of the AOC boondoggles that don't work just because they say they do. But it's the effect that, imagine changing zoning laws in cities all across this country. Where is that the prerogative of the federal government to dictate that? Government that works is government that's closest to the people. That's for the city councils. That's for the zoning boards. And for them to mandate this is another overreach of a government that's gone completely haywire over what they're trying to make Americans to force. But I think the good news is people are fighting back. People see it, and they're going to get vocal, and I think it's high time we do that.
Congressman Ralph Norman, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And more Americans are going back to work. Unemployment claims dropped to the lowest level we've seen during the pandemic. Our Melina Wisecup has more details on the economic recovery. So Melina, can you tell us more about the Department of Labor's latest report this week?
Yes, Steve. So according to this latest report by the Labor Department, around 350,000 people filed for unemployment last week. And like you said, this is a pandemic-era low, but it's still a ways away from what we were seeing before the pandemic. Just to put this into perspective, before the outbreak started, around 220,000 people would file for unemployment on average per week, and now we're still seeing around 350,000 unemployment claims. So that's still around 100,000 more people filing for unemployment now than before the pandemic. So while we still do have some ways to go, this latest report by the Labor Department does show that the labor market is making some progress, Steve.
So, Melina, this sounds like good news for the economy. What are economists saying about what this indicates for the economic recovery?
Steve, some economists are predicting that we will see those pre-pandemic numbers by the end of this year. But that is unpredictable since we're seeing this new Delta variant pop up and cases popping up in different places. And we are seeing some states reinstate some of those mandates we saw when the outbreak first began. Now, one thing we are seeing as far as the labor market goes is that there is a record number of job openings, but without people to fill them. Around 10 million job openings we see with 9 million people who are still unemployed. And a U.S. leading chief economist explains a few reasons why this might be the case.
The question is, why are claims so high? And the answer is because the unique nature of the benefit payments that have been provided, in that they also cover individuals who are not fully employed. So if you are no longer being able to work 40 hours a week, you're still able to apply for claims for those reduced hours. And in some instances, given the virus, the Delta variant in particular, there seems to be some pullback in some hours in some areas. So therefore, it's probably explaining some of the reason why the initial claims remain so high.
And he says another reason why we're still seeing these elevated levels of jobless claims is because in many cases, individuals are making more from these federal unemployment benefits than they would make working a full-time job. So of course, that's deterring people from going back to work. So this is another reason why we're still seeing those higher levels of unemployment than we saw before the pandemic, Steve.
Thanks for those updates, Melina. And the extended federal employment benefits are set to end at the beginning of September. Thursday morning, the U.S. Capitol Police responded to a bomb threat near the Capitol building, which turned into an hours-long standoff with police. The 49-year-old suspect from North Carolina later surrendered to police without incident. Capitol Police said that the man may have been suffering from emotional distress from recent losses in the family. The man's family confirmed to the Capitol Police that he just recently lost his mother. The man allegedly told his wife he was going fishing before he made his way to Washington, D.C. for the hours-long standoff with the Capitol Police. The crisis on the southern border has the Biden administration seeking to radically change the way asylum seekers are processed and granted asylum when they reach the United States. In the wake of the surge of illegal immigration on the southern border, the Biden administration is proposing a new system to process and expedite asylum cases. As it stands, each case is handled by a judge who oversees the case and makes a decision based on the merit of the claims. The Biden administration is proposing to take the decision away from the judges and to allow immigration officers to make the final decision. Critics of the proposed change say that by removing the power from the judges and by handing over the power to employees of the government who answer to the political party in charge of them is setting a messy and dangerous precedent. More schools, businesses, and entertainment venues are requiring COVID-19 vaccinations, and lawsuits are popping up to fight these mandates. How are courts handling these cases so far? We'll take a look at some of the most recent lawsuits and speak with a constitutional law professor to find out how these cases could unfold moving forward. Over 30 airline passengers now face fines of over $500,000 for assaulting passengers, refusing to wear a mask, and other alleged unruly behavior. As the push to get vaccinated grows stronger, more colleges are mandating that students get the shot. There's around 740 colleges that have enforced mandates so far. Some are also penalizing students for not complying. A college in Connecticut has even started fining unvaccinated students up to $2,200 and denying them internet access. Those not complying by September 14th will begin to face $100 weekly fines, with increases of $25 after every 2 weeks. Those who are exempt for religious and medical reasons still have to get tested, but they must be tested regularly. And if they miss a test, they'll face $100 fines each time they miss a test. Some colleges have faced lawsuits over these mandates. Most recently, hit with a suit, Rutgers University in New Jersey, a nonprofit group, Children's Health Defense, claims the mandate is both unconstitutional and illegal because they say it is, quote, an affront to human dignity and personal freedom, end quote. Another group of students at Indiana University filed suit for the same reason, but they ended up losing their case at a circuit court because the judge said the students who do not want to be vaccinated may go elsewhere. Now, with forced vaccinations popping up at schools and workplaces, there are still many Americans scrambling for exemptions for personal reasons, either health or religious. Some are wondering if there could be a chance that the courts will have a say in any of this. Professor Carrington, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Professor, I just wanted to ask you, when it comes to the virus and the vaccine mandates, we're seeing more of these cases popping up, where we see schools, businesses, and venues requiring vaccine for entry. What do you think is the court's role, if any, when it comes to vaccine mandates?
Well, they certainly have given indication that they're going to be pretty permissive about many of these mandates. I think that the least role that they have is, one, distinguishing between mandates that require you as a human being to get vaccinated versus requiring you to participate in certain events or part of life, such as going to school or being part of a business. The other is, are there going to be protections for religious objections or like objections for those who need them? And will there be the ability to, under the Free Exercise Clause, do that? I think at minimum, those are the kind of questions they're going to have to ask and that they're going to have to respect if they come into the courts.
Now, you just touched upon this, and I was going to ask you this a little bit later, but you mentioned it. When it comes to religious exemptions, right now we're seeing certain cases, I believe it's in New York City, the mayor is requiring all healthcare workers to have the vaccine with no exemptions and no exceptions. Does this open the door to discrimination lawsuits, potentially?
I think it certainly does. We'll have to see how far the court goes. One interesting case for people who are interested you might want to look at is Jacobson versus Massachusetts from 1905, where Massachusetts had a requirement of people to get vaccinated for smallpox or pay a fine. There's going to be some debate that's already erupted on the Supreme Court. How far can that go, and how far can it go without any exemptions? Given the court so far being pretty open to religious liberty claims, I think that there's a pretty good chance that a lawsuit like that would at least get a good number of votes if it got to the Supreme Court. We're going to see how they want to balance religious liberty objections versus public claims about health. But given that, I think that a lawsuit would at least get a pretty serious hearing before the Supreme Court.
Now, on the subject of the Supreme Court, there was a situation, I believe, where students at Indiana University petitioned the court to stop the mandates at the school, and Supreme Court Justice Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett, denied this case. On what basis do you think she decided the way she did?
Of course, she didn't give reasoning because it wasn't a full opinion, but I think the place to at least guess is to look at the opinion that she refused to challenge. It was by the Seventh Circuit. Interestingly, the three judges that decided were two President Trump appointees and I believe, Reagan appointee. Their argument was, one, there are religious and health exemptions that you can claim, and they said 7 of the 8 people that sued were eligible for the religious exemption. 2, this doesn't involve being unwilling to, this isn't a mandate for all people in Indiana. It's merely based on being able to come to Indiana University, and there's already precedent where a number of other vaccines for other ailments or other potential sicknesses have already been upheld that for people to come to college. And so the argument is all of that precedent says that they should be allowed to institute these restrictions, the college. And basically what the court said is if any of this is going to change, it'd have to be by the Supreme Court. The fact that Barrett wasn't willing to revisit it says that at least she didn't think the court in general was willing to revisit at least something that has a exception for religion and is not mandatory. You don't have to go to Indiana University. I think that's the conditions that made her do so in such a summary fashion.
Now, just briefly, if you could, do you see a path where the Supreme Court could get involved and take up some of these cases?
Yes, and I think, as I sort of implied before, I think especially if it is, one, a mandate of all persons with no way to get out, and especially if that mandate doesn't involve a religious exception in particular, I think then you could get some issues that would come up that the court would be willing to take up. And I think an interesting thing, again, is there was a debate between Justice Gorsuch and Chief Justice Roberts in one of the earlier religious liberty cases over some of the precedent. And it'll be interesting if they're willing to take that up in a way that may, I think, constrict how some of these mandates go forward.
Adam Carrington, Associate Professor at Hillsdale College. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
President Biden says he'll issue a new vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. The president also says he's working to take action against governors fighting against mask mandates.
Today, I'm directing the Secretary of Education, an educator himself, to take additional steps to protect our children. This includes using all of his oversight authorities and legal action, if appropriate, against governors who are trying to block and intimidate local school officials and educators.
He accused politicians fighting against mask mandates of setting a dangerous tone. Governors and legislators in 9 states have taken hard stances against mask mandates in schools. Another step Biden's taking is mandating the vaccine for nursing home staff. He says if you work in a nursing home and serve people on Medicare or Medicaid, you'll need to get vaccinated. According to AARP, there are over 186,000 nursing home residents and staff in long-term care facilities. Over 30 airline passengers now face fines for hundreds of thousands of dollars for alleged unruly behavior. The Federal Aviation Administration announced Thursday it will request more than $500,000 in fines against 34 passengers for a variety of offenses, some of which include throwing luggage, assaulting passengers, and other alleged unruly behavior. It brings the total fines for 2021 to more than $1 million. Since this January, the FAA has received more than 3,800 cases of unruly behavior, including over 2,800 reports of passengers refusing to wear a mask. The U.S. Transportation Department said on Wednesday it will limit some flights from Chinese carriers to 40% passenger capacity for 4 weeks. This announcement comes after the Chinese regime imposed similar limits on 4 United Airlines flights. This order will limit U.S. to China flights on 4 different Chinese airlines to 40% capacity for at least a month. China told United Airlines earlier this month it would be imposing sanctions after 5 passengers who traveled from San Francisco to Shanghai allegedly tested positive for COVID-19. The Transportation Department said carriers have no means to independently verify positive test results alleged by Chinese authorities. Furthermore, there is no way to establish where or when a traveler may have contracted the virus. The U.S. and China have sparred over flight services since the beginning of the pandemic. The latest limits come as many Chinese students head to the U.S. for the start of fall classes. The world's 3rd biggest port is closed in China after 1 employee tested positive for the CCP virus. What does that mean to the global supply chain and American consumers? China has shut down a major port for over a week after 1 worker tested positive for the CCP virus. Ahead of the peak U.S. shopping season, container shipping rates from China has skyrocketed from a year ago. What does this mean for American consumers? China's Ningbo port is the world's 3rd largest cargo port. It serves over 100 countries worldwide, mainly in North America and Europe. On August 11th, local authorities in China announced that the port was partially closed because 1 employee tested positive for the CCP virus. This employee was fully vaccinated in March. They are saying that the port will remain closed until September 6th. It is the 2nd time this year the Chinese government has shut down its key ports. When another positive case was found in Shenzhen in late May, the port was partially closed for about a month, which led to a massive disruption among freightliners. The Chinese Communist Party is clinging tightly to its zero-case strategy. As more and more countries try to live with the virus, the Communist Party seeks to eliminate the virus at any cost. The world's second biggest economy might be left isolated for years to come. It poses big challenges to the global supply chain. The Shenzhen port closure in May caused a huge backlog of shipping goods. The impact even exceeded the Suez Canal incident in March, when a cargo ship was stuck, blocking passage for 6 days. Container shipping rates from China to the United States reached record highs in August, costing $20,000 for a 40-foot container. The price has doubled from a few days ago and is about 10 times higher than 2 years ago. Industry insiders say they haven't seen this for more than 30 years. China is the biggest import partner with the United States, and American consumers will soon feel the pain of skyrocketing shipping rates. For instance, the majority of toys sold in America are made in China. Ahead of the holiday season, many toy companies have to get products shipped in August. If shipments get delayed weeks to months, companies won't be able to put products on store shelves by October. They might have to leave those products in China or store them until next year. Even for those products delivered on time, the price never actually stays the same. A toy company manager told the Wall Street Journal one of their new products was priced at $15 earlier this year and is now selling for $18 in order to offset higher shipping costs. Some thought 2020 couldn't be worse for the shipping industry, but it turns out that 2021 is proving even more challenging. The freight industry is expecting these extreme rates to last until early next year. That's all for this evening's Capitol Report. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'm your host, Steve Lance, and we'll see you next time.